Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into something we're calling the paradox of perception.
Right.
And our guide is this incredible, really ancient story from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Still feels so relevant, though.
It absolutely does.
Our mission, basically, is to unpack this really fascinating incident. It involves King Chitraketu, Lord Shiva, and Parvati.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to pull out the wisdom using a few different angles, some surprising ones maybe.
Yeah.
Like psychology, leadership.
Relationship dynamics too, even digital age stuff.
Exactly. It's all about how our perceptions, how they shape our judgments, our responses, especially with, say, spiritual figures or people in charge.
Yeah.
And to help us navigate all these layers,
Yeah.
we've got an amazing expert with us, brilliant at connecting these kinds of diverse ideas and giving us that crucial context.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here. And the core paradox, it's just so striking, isn't it? You have this, seemingly simple public moment, and it leads to a curse. But then beneath that, the curse is actually a divine blessing. It's packed with meaning for us today, truly.
Okay, let's jump right in then. The core incident. Set the scene for us.
All right. So King Chitraketu, he's not just any king. He's described as highly advanced, a serious devotee of Lord Vishnu.
Okay.
And he's traveling in this incredible airplane, brilliantly effulgent, it says, a gift from Vishnu himself.
Wow. Okay. So very elevated status.
Definitely. And as he's flying, he comes across this assembly, this gathering of great saintly persons, Siddhas, Karanas, very enlightened beings. And Lord Shiva is there.
A kind of cosmic council, you might say.
Yeah.
Sounds very serious, very solemn.
Extremely solemn. And right in the middle of this assembly, Chitraketu sees something, unexpected.
What does he see?
He sees Lord Shiva embracing Parvati, who's sitting on his lap. The text uses a specific word, alkatam, implying this deep intimacy, like she's part of him.
In this super serious assembly of saints.
Exactly. Even in that setting, it signifies their natural, profound connection.
Okay, now that feels like a setup for some drama.
Yeah.
Because Chitraketu's reaction is pretty strong, right?
No, it's striking. He doesn't just watch quietly. He laughs loudly.
Loudly. Oh, wow.
And then he calls out Shiva, criticizing what he sees as, inappropriate behavior for such a sacred gathering. And Parvati is right there, hearing every word.
That takes some serious guts. Or maybe something else. Public criticism like that.
And it has immediate consequences. Parvati is, angered by his words. It's quite direct.
I can imagine. So what does she do?
She responds right away. She curses him to be reborn as a demon, Vritrasura, major figure in later events.
A demon from a king blessed by Vishnu. It's a huge fall. But then the story flips again, doesn't it?
It does. This is the really amazing part. Chitraketu, this powerful king faced with this terrible curse, he just accepts it humbly. No argument, no protest.
He doesn't fight back at all.
Not at all. He understands it as the Lord's will. He sees it perhaps as karma or some divine plan unfolding, just complete acceptance.
That level of acceptance is hard to fathom.
It truly is. And then Lord Shiva steps in and reveals the deeper layer. He explains to Parvati, look, this is the nature of Vaishnavas, devotees like Chitraketu. They're beyond these material ups and downs, happiness, distress, even curses.
Okay.
And the commentators, like Vijwanatha Chakravarti Hurukura, explained this wasn't really just Parvati's anger, it was actually Vishnu's plan all along.
Vishnu's plan, to have his devotee cursed.
Yes, a kind of divine shortcut. The curse was arranged to bring Chitraketu back to the spiritual world, welcome to Loka, much faster. So this apparent setback, this curse...
Was actually hidden mercy.
Exactly. A perfectly orchestrated act of grace to bring him closer to the Supreme. It's quite profound.
That really makes you think, doesn't it? About our own judgments. We make them so fast.
Incredibly fast.
And what happens when that quick judgment hits something, spiritual or just beyond our normal categories?
That's the crux of it. Neuroscience talks about this 100-millisecond problem. Our brains judge almost instantly. It's a survival thing, maybe. But when that lightning-fast judgment meets something transcendental, or even just behavior outside our usual norms, that's where the paradox kicks in. Chitraketu, even being so advanced, fell into what we could call mental traps.
Mental traps. Okay, I'm listening. What kind of traps? I bet we fall into them too.
Oh, absolutely. The first big one is confirmation bias. Think about it. Chitraketu had this strong belief. His mental model was great saints act with perfect decorum in public, especially in such an assembly.
Makes sense. That seems logical.
Right, but then he sees Shiva embracing Parvati. That clashed with his model. It caused, cognitive dissonance, mental discomfort.
Okay.
So instead of thinking, maybe my model is too limited, or maybe Shiva's decorum operates on a different level, he resolved it by thinking,
Shiva must be wrong.
exactly, Shiva's acting improperly. He made the observation fit his existing belief rather than adjusting the belief. We do this all the time, filtering information to fit what we already think, like seeing, say, a devotee at a fancy restaurant and immediately thinking, oh, they must be materialistic.
Guilty as charged. Okay, what's trap number 2?
The fundamental attribution error. This is a classic. We tend to judge others based purely on their actions, but we judge ourselves based on our intentions.
Ah, yes. I didn't mean it like that.
Precisely. Chitraketu saw the action, the public display of affection, and judged it harshly. He completely missed or didn't consider the underlying reality, the natural transcendental love between Shiva and Parvati. The antidote, which is really challenging, is to consciously try to assume positive intent in others, at least until proven otherwise.
Much easier said than done. Okay, what's the third trap? You said this one might be tricky for spiritual folks.
Yeah, it often is. It's called spiritual bypassing. This is when we use spiritual ideas or our identity as spiritual people to, well, avoid dealing with our own psychological stuff or avoid real growth.
How did Chitraketu do that?
His internal thought might have been something like, I'm so advanced, I would never act like that in such a setting, therefore Shiva must be wrong. It's a subtle kind of pride, masked as spiritual correctness.
Ah, I see. It's like saying I'm beyond that kind of problem.
Exactly. Or real devotees don't have those struggles. It's using spirituality to feel superior or avoid looking at our own flaws rather than using it for genuine humility and transformation. Spiritual pride is very subtle.
Wow. Confirmation bias, fundamental attribution error, spiritual bypassing, those are heavy hitters. So how do we even begin to avoid falling into these traps? It feels like they're hardwired.
They kind of are, but the hopeful part comes from things like neuroplasticity. Our brains can change, and modern science is actually finding evidence for what ancient practices taught all along. We can talk about the neuroplasticity of humility.
Okay, intriguing. Tell me more.
Well, studies show practices like meditation can actually decrease activity in the default mode network of the brain. Some scientists even call this the ego network because it's so tied up in self-thought, worrying what others think, judging.
So meditation can literally quiet the ego chatter part of the brain.
Over time, yes. It seems to help shift our baseline. So those ancient instructions, like Lord Chaitanya's teaching Trinad Api Sunasena, be humbler than a blade of grass, more tolerant than a tree. They aren't just nice poems. They are, in a way, instructions for rewiring our brains towards humility.
That's fascinating. So practice actually changes the brain structure related to ego.
That's the idea. And for a more immediate tool, something practical for when you feel that judgment rising up, we can use the pause method.
Pause. Okay, break it down.
P, perceive the judgment as it arises. Just notice it. A, acknowledge the bias. Don't beat yourself up. Just recognize, okay, my brain is doing that thing. Understand your limited perspective. Realize you probably don't have the full picture. S, seek a higher perspective or alternative explanation. Could there be another reason? E, engage with humility and curiosity, not condemnation. Ask questions instead of making pronouncements.
Perceive, acknowledge, understand, seek, engage. Pause. I like that. That's very actionable.
It helps create that crucial gap between stimulus and response where wisdom can enter.
You also mentioned another story about pride and curses turning into blessings.
Yes, the story of Sudarshana. He was a Vidyadhara, incredibly beautiful, wealthy, powerful, and very proud of it.
Uh-oh. Pride again?
Exactly. He saw some sages who were, well, not physically attractive, and he ridiculed them, laughed at their appearance.
Not a good move.
Definitely not. They were powerful sages, and they cursed him to become a python, a lowly serpent. He lost all his booty and opulence.
A harsh lesson.
Extremely harsh. He spent years like that. But eventually, Lord Krishna himself came by and touched Sudarshana with his lotus foot, liberating him. So the curse, born from his pride, actually led to his ultimate degradation, but then his salvation. It forced a humility that maybe his prosperity never would have taught him. It shows how falling, when met with grace, can lead you higher.
Another example of a curse being ultimately a blessing. Powerful stuff.
Okay.
Let's shift gears a bit. Angle 2. Leadership. You drew a parallel to a modern CEO.
Right. The CEO's dilemma. Imagine a CEO, maybe their company's in crisis, and a photo surfaces of them at a relaxed family barbecue. People might get outraged, right? How can they be relaxing now?
Totally. It looks bad. Optics matter.
Exactly. It's similar to Chitraketu seeing Shiva in what he perceived as an overly casual moment during a solemn cosmic boardroom meeting. It raises questions about leadership styles.
Like, should leaders always be on, always performing?
That's the tension, authentic versus performative leadership. Some leaders feel immense pressure to maintain a perfect, predictable image. Others, maybe like Shiva in this analogy, operate from a place of deeper authenticity. Their actions might surprise people, might not fit the expected mold because they aren't primarily driven by external perception.
So this connects to that principle you mentioned about powerful beings being beyond fault-finding.
Precisely. The authority paradox, or in Sanskrit, Tejasam Dosaya. It means that for those who possess genuine spiritual power, tehas, their actions often transcend conventional rules and shouldn't be judged by ordinary standards.
To give some examples.
Think of the sun. It draws moisture from everywhere, even unclean places like where urine might be, but the sun itself never becomes contaminated. Its power purifies.
You're a good analogy.
Or, in the human world, maybe someone like Warren Buffett living relatively simply despite immense wealth. It defies typical expectations. Or an ER doctor breaking a minor hospital protocol to save someone's life. The higher principle takes precedence. The key, though, is that this applies to genuine authority acting for a higher purpose, not as an excuse for misconduct by someone just abusing power.
That's a crucial distinction.
Yeah.
So looking back at the story, how did the main players handle this cosmic PR situation, their crisis response styles?
Really interesting to compare them. First, you have Shiva's response. Basically, silent wisdom. He just smiled gently. He knew the bigger picture, the divine plan. He let it unfold. The lesson, sometimes the wisest response is non-reaction, letting things play out.
Okay, the silent approach. What about Parvati?
Parvati's response was the opposite. Immediate, decisive action. She set a boundary. She delivered the consequence. Her role involved protection, upholding a certain standard, maybe, the lesson. Sometimes protecting what's important requires swift, clear action.
Right, direct intervention. And Chitraketu?
Chitraketu's response was the confrontation itself. His speaking up, although flawed in its approach and perception, did create the situation, the lila, the teaching moment. So the lesson there might be that even flawed feedback can, paradoxically, serve a purpose, even if it brings consequences for the speaker. It led to his growth.
So silence, action, confrontation, all had a role. This leads to a big question for us as followers or members of a community. When do we speak up if we see something we think is wrong?
Yeah.
And when do we just trust? It's a dilemma.
A huge dilemma. There's no easy formula, but maybe a framework helps. Consider speaking up if there's clear, tangible harm happening. You have solid information, not just assumption. You've tried or will try private conversation first. And this is key. Your motivation is genuinely service, not ego or making yourself look good.
And when should we lean towards trust?
Maybe trust and wait when your understanding is clearly limited. There's no immediate, obvious harm. The person involved has a strong track record of integrity and higher purpose. And always, always check your own motives. Am I trying to help, or am I just trying to be right or feel important?
That self-reflection is critical. You mentioned an unconventional guru scenario.
Yeah, think about it. A respected spiritual teacher starts using, say, social media in a way that feels very modern, maybe jarring to traditionalists. Or they adapt rituals. Half the community might say, they're losing it, this isn't right. The other half might say, they're being relevant, reaching more people. It's a classic Chitraketu situation. Before judging, how much do we really understand their unique purpose, their context, their reasons?
It really forces you to examine your own assumptions. Okay, let's pivot to angle 3, relationships. You talked about a sacred geometry.
Right, thinking about relationships in a spiritual setting, there are horizontal ones like peer-to-peer. Think Chitraketu and Shiva, both as servants of Vishnu in a broader sense.
Okay, equals in service.
The lesson there is respecting diverse approaches. Assume positive intent. If you have feedback, maybe talk privately first rather than a public call-out. Learn from each other's styles.
Makes sense. Then vertical relationships.
Student-teacher, leader-follower. Chitraketu's public criticism is basically a how not to do it example here. Proper protocol usually involves humility, private inquiry, service motivation, and accepting the answer you get, even if it's not what you wanted. The rule of thumb often is, the more public the critique of authority, the bigger the potential disruption or offense.
Because it can shake others' faith or create division.
Exactly. And then there are triangular dynamics. This is where Parvati comes in strongly, the protective spouse principle.
Defending her husband.
Yes. It reminds us that relationships deeply influence perception. Criticizing someone's teacher in front of them or someone's spouse, or intervening in a relationship without understanding the loyalty. It's complex terrain. We need to be mindful of those existing bonds.
That brings up the whole masculine-feminine energy thing, too, with Shiva's and Parvati's responses.
Yeah.
How do we understand that?
We can see them as archetypes, present in everyone. Shiva embodies that masculine archetype here. Detached wisdom, spaciousness, non-reactivity, seeing the long game. Parvati embodies the feminine archetype. Engaged emotion, fierce protection, setting clear boundaries, immediate justice.
So not strictly about gender, but about types of energy or response modes.
Exactly. And spiritual maturity isn't about choosing one, it's about integrating both. Knowing when to be spacious and allowing, like Shiva, and when to be fiercely protective and boundary setting, like Parvati. Accessing the right energy for the right situation.
How can we communicate more effectively, keeping these dynamics in mind? You mentioned 4 pillars.
Yes, the 4 pillars of constructive communication, especially when offering feedback or raising concerns. Pillar 1, timing. Private is almost always better first. Pillar 2, intention, service, not ego. Pillar 3, method, humble inquiry, not accusation. Pillar 4, follow-up, accepting the response gracefully.
And maybe some practical language tips, red flags versus green lights.
Definitely avoid red flag phrases like, you always, or everyone thinks. They just trigger defensiveness. Use green light phrases instead. I'm having trouble understanding this. Or could you help me see your perspective on? Focus on your own experience and seek understanding.
That's super helpful. Now, angle 4, the digital age. You said Chitraketu's loud laugh was like a viral tweet.
It really feels like that, doesn't it? A public call-out of a respected figure. And look at the parallels. Immediate polarization. Shiva's followers versus maybe others who agreed with Chitraketu. Consequences ripple outwards, and in our age, there's a permanent digital record.
Yeah, nothing disappears online. Which brings up your point about context collapse.
Exactly. Back then, Shiva's moment was seen by a specific group in a specific context. Today, someone snaps a photo, posts it, and boom, it's global, completely detached from its original context. Anyone can interpret or misinterpret it. The lesson for us: maybe act as if anything you do or say could become public, because it might.
That's a sobering thought. And the consequences. You contrasted digital curses with divine mercy.
Yes. Chitraketu's curse, harsh as it seemed, was ultimately revoked or transformed by divine grace. It served a higher purpose for his growth. Online curses, getting canceled, piled on, doxed, often feel purely punitive. The digital record is unforgiving, redemption is hard to come by, social forgiveness is rare. How do we create online spaces that allow for mistakes, growth, and maybe even forgiveness? It's a huge challenge.
And the motivation behind online call-outs. Is it always pure?
That's the virtue signaling versus genuine concern question. Am I posting this criticism because I genuinely want to help or correct a wrong, or even subconsciously, am I doing it to show how righteous or aware I am? Chitraketu likely had a mix, some re-concern, maybe, but definitely tinged with that spiritual pride, wanting to uphold his standard. We have to be honest with ourselves online.
So comparing cancel culture to divine justice.
Yeah.
What are the key differences?
Similarities might be the speed and the public nature, sometimes a mob mentality, but the differences in the divine model are crucial. Ideally, perfect beings responding with wisdom, not just emotion. Consequences aimed at ultimate growth, not just punishment. Redemption always being possible, and an underlying higher purpose for everyone involved. Can we bring more wisdom, compassion, and focus on growth to our online conflicts? That's the aspiration.
How can we apply this ancient story to detox our digital lives a bit? Any practices?
Definitely. Inspired by Chitraketu, learning to control his mind and words. Maybe start the day with a few minutes of meditation or reflection before grabbing the phone. Set an intention for mindful communication. Use that pause method before hitting reply or share on something provocative. Maybe reflect in the evening. Where did I judge online today? Where could I have shown more understanding? And maybe try a weekly digital Sabbath one day, completely offline, to reset.
Those sound like really grounding practices in a chaotic digital world. Okay, let's go even deeper. Angle 5, philosophy and spiritual economics. That sounds interesting.
It ties back to that big question. How can someone perfect, like Shiva, seem to act, well, imperfectly in Chitraketu's eyes?
Right, the paradox of perfection.
We can look at it a few ways. One is absolute versus relative reality. From Shiva's absolute transcendental viewpoint, his actions are perfect. From our limited relative viewpoint, they might seem flawed. Another is contextual perfection. What's perfect depends on the context and consciousness level. Shiva's operating way beyond ordinary rules. And third, teaching through paradox. Sometimes the apparent imperfection is the lesson. The controversy itself educates.
This sounds like it connects to levels of morality.
Exactly. Think of levels of moral development. There's the conventional level, following rules because they're rules, or to avoid punishment. Chitraketu was kind of stuck here initially, applying conventional rules to Shiva.
Okay.
Then the post-conventional level, understanding the principles behind the rules and knowing when a higher principle allows you to transcend a lower rule.
Like the ER doctor example.
Right. And finally, the transcendental level, acting purely from divine love, beyond rule-based morality altogether. That's where figures like Shiva operate. If we judge the transcendental from the conventional level, we'll always misunderstand.
So these divine pastimes, these Lilas, they're not just random.
Not at all. They serve multiple purposes. There's Rasa, the divine enjoyment, the Lord and his associates' experience. There's Leela, the cosmic play, the drama that teaches us profound truths through stories. And there's Karuna, divine compassion, creating pathways, even through curses, for souls to come back. Chitraketu's story is a masterclass in all three.
Okay, now spiritual economics. What's that about? Accumulating spiritual wealth.
Kind of. We work hard on our spiritual path, practices, study, service. We build up spiritual capital. But here's the paradox, that very achievement can lead to pride if we're not careful. Chitraketu had a huge portfolio, right? Divine plane, advanced knowledge, blessings.
He was spiritually wealthy.
Very. And that can subtly create entitlement, like, I know better. This is the paradox of spiritual achievement. We have to advance, but advancement itself can be a pitfall. So sometimes the divine arrangement includes challenges or setbacks precisely to keep that pride in check, to deepen our reliance.
So it's better to think of our practice as an offering, not an investment expecting returns.
That's a much safer, more humble approach. The offering model frees you from anxiety about results and the pride of success. And sometimes the divine allows what looks like bankruptcy as blessing.
Bankruptcy is blessing.
An apparent spiritual loss, a major setback that forces you back to zero, back to pure dependence on grace. It strips away the ego of accomplishment. Chitraketu's curse, ultimately leading him home, is the perfect example. Losing everything materially or spiritually appearing to gained him everything ultimately.
That's a radical reframing. Is there another story like that? Judging externals.
Oh yes, the story of Puttarika Vidyanidhi. Lord Chaitanya was deeply devoted to him, missed him greatly. But when Puttarika showed up, he looked, well, worldly. Fancy clothes, luxurious lifestyle.
Not what you'd expect of a great saint.
Exactly. And another devotee, Gadadhara Patita, who was very renounced, saw this and judged him harshly internally. How can a devotee live like this?
Sounds familiar? Like Chitraketu judging Shiva.
Very similar internal judgment based on externals. But then someone recited a verse about deep spiritual love and separation from Krishna. And Puttarika completely lost it. He fell into ecstatic tears, rolling on the ground, ripping his expensive clothes in divine madness.
Whoa.
Gadadharapeta saw this raw, intense devotion and was completely humbled. He realized his judgment was totally superficial. He immediately begged to become Puttarika's disciple.
So don't judge the book by its cover, especially the spiritual book.
Precisely. External appearances tell you very little about inner spiritual depth. Humility and being willing to admit we were wrong are crucial.
Okay, we've covered so much ground. Psychology, leadership, relationships, digital life, philosophy. It's amazing how this one story holds all that. If you had to boil it all down, what's the single biggest takeaway?
It really keeps coming back to one thing, doesn't it? No matter how you slice it, the core principle, the foundation for everything else, is humility. Humility is the key to perception, to learning, to connection, to advancement.
Humility. Okay.
Okay.
So let's get practical. If we feel that urge to criticize bubbling up, especially about spiritual matters or people, what's a step-by-step process?
All right, a 6-step process for when you want to criticize. Step 1, pause. Immediately, use the pause method we discussed. Check your biases. Step 2, consider. Could this person be operating from a different reality, a higher purpose I don't see? Vijayasam Nadosaya. Step 3, communicate. If you must, use the right channel, private first. Right time, right method, humble inquiry. Step 4, examine your motive, honestly. Is this service or ego? Am I trying to help or just be right? Step 5, reflect. Am I defending my own rigid expectation, my spiritual investment, or truly serving? And step 6, the emergency protocol. Take 3 deep breaths. Ask, how would Chitraketu respond after he learned his lesson? And choose humility. Always choose humility over needing to be right.
PCCR plus the emergency protocol. That's solid. Now, flip side, what if we're the ones getting criticized? How do we respond wisely?
We can use the Shiva Chitra Kakatu response model. 3 options, really. Option 1, the Shiva response, graceful silence. Seeing the bigger picture, especially if the criticism comes from clear misunderstanding. Let it pass without reacting defensively. Option 2, the Chitraketu response, post-lesson. Humble acceptance. Even if it's harsh, even if it's only partly true, accept it without protest. Look for the grain of truth you can learn from. See it as purification or guidance. Option 3, the Parvati response, appropriate boundary setting. Sometimes protecting something sacred or preventing harm requires a clear, firm, but still compassionate response. Not from ego, but for a higher good.
Shiva, Chitraketu, Parvati responses, depending on the situation.
Right. The underlying principles are ditch the ego and defensiveness, always look for potential lesson, trust there's a bigger orchestration, and use it as fuel for your own spiritual practice. And maybe we can even build communities that practice this consciously, humility circles, or study groups on navigating correction and forgiveness.
Building Chitraketu conscious communities. I love that. This whole deep dive has felt like uncovering, a kind of spiritual technology from this ancient narrative. It's so practical for today.
It truly is. And the Bhagavatam itself says that simply hearing this story with the right receptive attitude from the right source can actually help free us from material conditioning. It's potent.
More than just a story.
Much more. And think about Shiva's final teaching to Parvati. After Chitraketu accepts the curse so humbly, Shiva says, essentially, did you see that? Did you see the greatness of the Vaishnavas, the devotees?
He points to Chitraketu's humility.
Yes. He highlights that Chitraketu's tolerance, his humility, was actually more powerful than Parvati's curse. Humility trumped supernatural power. True greatness isn't about power or position. It's about that selfless, humble service attitude.
Wow. So the final question for us, for you listening, is maybe, can we start to recognize that kind of greatness, that potential for humility, for transformative response, not just in legendary figures, but in the everyday people around us? And maybe even more importantly, can we recognize and cultivate it in ourselves? So here's your call to action. Pick one angle, just one insight from today that really struck you. Choose one practical exercise, maybe the pause method, maybe reflecting on a response style, and try it out today. And if you found this helpful, share this teaching, share this deep dive with just one other person. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration. Keep digging deep, keep applying this timeless wisdom.